It's time. It's episode 62, the ATM podcast. We're talking about a South African cricket real chokers, or is it just a coincidence? That whole one-day tournament in India was a bit of a fizz in the end. Is there a future for one-day cricket at all? Everton docked 10 points. Is that fair? Are Man City going to get the same treatment? Hamish McLennan, big, boisterous, bombastic chairman of Australian rugby, has gone.
Apologise to me!
Mark, let's kick it with the one-day cricket, though. Did you like the tournament in the end, or did you kind of think it was all a bit contrived, it was all a bit manufactured for a result that never happened, India didn't win?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one, the Cricket World Cup format. I'm not sure what the right format is, whether you end up having two pools or you just have, it's interesting. You can say, well, look, really should the Netherlands or Afghanistan be there? But they actually did front up, didn't they? You've got a World Cup tournament without the West Indies. So you do have to start asking questions about where one-day cricket does sit. We don't play a lot of it these days. And I've said this, I think that if it wasn't for baseball and the way Test cricket's being played at the moment, other than people in India watching the IPL, I think the game's it's got a bit of an identity crisis. I like the fact that every side plays each other. It wouldn't have felt right, as I said last week, if New Zealand had beaten India in a semi-final, and that would have been the first game India had lost, and somehow we made our way through. But it was all get up for the Indians, wasn't it? And I think maybe the danger for them was they went into that having won 9 or 10 straight, and then expecting to win 11 straight. And you just felt at some point, with the fickle nature of one-day cricket, that they were going to come undone. Look, what I did enjoy about it was every night there was a game on. Unlike the Rugby World Cup, there was a game on every night to look forward to. So you always knew there was something happening, where the Rugby World Cup, you go 3 or 4 days and then suddenly be very much a Friday, Saturday, Sunday sort of spectating window. But look, it's like anything, isn't it? You can criticise it, but what's the solution?
Yeah, I don't know. Look, and also
you've got to have a World Cup. A one-day cricket's T20 cricket's too fickle for me. One player can win it, and that to me is not what it should be about. What I do want to see, though, Martin, is I just want to see more on offer for the bowlers. It's just become so ridiculously in favour of the batsman now that, why as a young person do you want to take up fast bowling? Why do you, would the Hadley and the McGraths and stuff be effective in this
why would you be a test opening batsman? A number of questions there. We have played, Mark, get this, 21 ODIs in the last year previous to the one-day World Cup. Can you name any of those series? We actually played England in 4 of them before the World Cup. They're just so forgettable, aren't they? And this is where I worry about it. Like, where does it fit into the schedule? You've got all these meaningless T20 tournaments, which are franchise tournaments, which nobody cares about. You've got a Test cricket calendar, which is thoroughly reduced now to just individual series between countries like India, maybe South Africa, England, Australia. And where does the rest of it fit in? We played 2 tests, and tell me when we did last and who were they against. And no one can remember any of this stuff. The one-day cricket tournament comes around every 4 years. It's bloody brilliant to watch while it's there. But then what happens in the meantime?
No, exactly. Cricket's got a real crisis, and I blame the Indians and the BCCI for much of this. I think they've hijacked the game. I think it was Mark Butcher, the former English player, that said, look, the ICC now really is just, it's just an office for the BCCI. It's a subsidiary of them. And as I said, the only people that are making any real money in this and benefiting from it are the players. And I've had that same discussion around rugby in this country. And it's because you've got 1 billion people in India and that subcontinent who allow for the commercial side of it. And as I've always said, I felt, with a lot of these professional tournaments, there's probably a level of money laundering or some sort of level of financial skullduggery going on, which props these things up. But that's just the way the economy, that's just the way the culture is in that part of the world when it comes to the business side of things. When we were growing up, Martin, our Black Caps for our New Zealand cricket team, they were just such familiar faces. They were, they were as big as the All Blacks. We knew who they were over the summer period.
They were appointment viewing. I can vividly remember series back from the 80s, from the 90s, and these matches really, you felt like they actually meant something. These days, it's all the cricket calendar is just such mumbo jumbo trying to figure it out. But when you go back through how many matches the Black Caps have played in white ball cricket over the last year, it's just extraordinary. The only thing is none of them stay with you.
No, and they're all meaningless. And I think what cricket's tried to do now is bring in this ranking system. He's the number one-day bowler in the world, number one-day batsman in the world. It's like, really? I think it was was it Kyle Mills, who I think years ago was given the number one-day bowling ranking in the world. And it's like, no offense to Kyle, mate, but you're not the best one-day bowler in the world. You're just not. The Australians would not put you in their team. And so they're looking for other ways of somehow trying to prop this up, trying to create some interest. But you're right. If the New Zealand cricket team loses these days a one-day game, the nation doesn't wake up the next day and mourn. No one gives a damn. Talkback doesn't go off anymore. And there again, there's no jeopardy. There's no meaning to any of it. And look, even at a test match level here in New Zealand, I mean, who have we got coming up over summer? Pakistan again?
No, I think we've actually got South Africa. I think England come here. But again, I mean, it all just floats under the radar.
But exactly. But we don't know, though, do we?
No, we don't.
And that's part of the television issue too, where they took it away from mainstream television and put it on a platform, and so we suddenly started to lose interest, almost by default, or not necessarily through our own intent. But the fact that we can't sit here and name exactly what test matches are coming up is the point of what we're actually talking
exactly,
about.
That's exactly what
I mean, the most compelling cricket I've watched, it was still the Ashes.
Yep.
That's all I'm looking forward to now.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to England turning to Australia in a couple of years' time. That's all I'm looking forward to. And the only other games I'm interested in is India when they play away from home, and see whether or not they can be beaten away from home. There's no point watching them play at home because they win everything at home.
Apologise to me!
Let's talk about Aussie just quickly, though. Aren't they incredible, that bunch of cricketers? Doesn't matter who they put in. Doesn't matter, whoever wears the cap, whoever pulls, the canary yellow on. When it comes to one-day cricket, mate, 6 wins in the last 9 tournaments, Mark. 5 of those away from home. I mean, those are stats that the All Blacks should have, that we want the All Blacks to have, and that we don't have.
Well, they're just ruthless, the Australians, aren't they? I mean, they are a bunch of mongrels, most of them, in terms of some of the conduct and stuff. But boy, there is an edge to them. They have a legacy. They have an expectation. Look, there's probably some argument that we are a bit too nice at times, and maybe we need to be a little bit more like the Aussies. But they've just got depth. They've just got quality, haven't they? They've got legacy, and don't underestimate that one generation inspires the next generation or places an expectation on the current generation.
So.
And I think that's what you're seeing. Yep. Do I like the David Warners? Do I like the way they conduct themselves? No, I cannot. Cannot stand them, mate. Cannot stand them.
Yeah.
But they know how to win, don't they? And the Australians love them. Again, jumping up and down, another sense of nationalism written off. But when it's all said and done, they find a way of winning, don't they? And you got to admire them for it. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about maybe South Africa. Are they chokers? Look, I don't think so. I just don't think. As we talked about, one-day cricket's fickle. I mean, New Zealand, 4 or 5 consecutive semi-finals now. We've been in 2, we've lost 2. South Africa, no more chokers than we are. They just simply don't have the depth. And it would be, history says that, look, it's the one big tournament South African sport haven't won. But I'll argue that you look at how much coverage cricket's had in this country over the last 100 years, and I think we've officially won ICC tournament, haven't we? So, we're no different. And I still say this about New Zealand cricket. We're the great underachievers of New Zealand sport. They are still the great underachievers of New Zealand sport. Yes, they've provided us some moments, but they still actually haven't won anything. The greatest moment in New Zealand cricket for me was the Test Series victory over Australia in 1985.
Apologise to me!
Let's rapid fire through the next. I just want to talk briefly about England versus North Macedonia today. That was a European Championship qualifier. And if any team is reflective of a coach, and if you don't think a coach can influence a bunch of players, well then Gareth Southgate, who is just so boring, so conservative, and so square in the way that he thinks and operates, has turned this group of players who should be a golden generation, a really talented bunch for their clubs, into just the most fearful, fraidy cat team that just hates the ball, won't go forward. And it's every time I watch them, they are so disappointing to watch when you look at who is actually on the team sheet and the talent that they have.
I agree, but they reached the final of the European Cup. They reached the semi-finals of the World Cup. They're unbeaten so far in European qualifying.
They win by drawing 0-0, Mark, or scoring 1 goal. I mean, they should be a hell of a lot better than this. This should be a swashbuckling side. Look at who they've got. Look at those players in the Premier League.
But that's the history of English football. I mean, that's the history of English football. No coach since 1966 has ever got the best out of any England team. And you'll argue that Southgate's probably been the closest to doing it in recent times. But I agree with you completely. I mean, when you do run through, when you run through the England side, and you've still got Walker and Maguire sitting there at the back, and at times you've played Jordan Henderson, and you're trying to play Alexander-Arnold in the midfield. You've got Grealish, who used to once actually run at players and try and beat players. No longer the Grealish that I remember. And you do run through the bench though. The likes of Foden, Ramsdale, Rashford, and yeah, I'm with you. What do you do though? But it's the same thing, isn't it? If it's not him, who is it?
Yeah.
Who is it?
Yeah.
Do you go and get a Jurgen Klopp? Do you go and get a European
Oh,
manager?
they've tried that.
So it's all very well to criticise him, but who wants the England job?
Apologise to me!
Hamish McLennan, is this guy just a victim of the fact that he was trying to do too much too soon, or is he just a twat who basically overstepped his authority? Because when you look at it and the way that it's been reported, of course, everyone hates him and the associations all wanted him out, and he backed Eddie Jones and Eddie Jones shat on him and left and all of that, and the Aussies got knocked out of the World Cup early. But did they need somebody like this to come in with the broom and shake the place, and get the monkeys out of the trees? Because rugby in Australia is in the doldrums. It's got a World Cup coming up and a Lions Tour coming up. He tried to be a John O'Neill and it's completely backfired on him.
Look, I don't think New Zealand rugby's any different. I mean, yeah, it's easy to point the finger, isn't it? Eddie Jones and the disaster and the failure of the World Cup, but you've got to look at those that did appoint him. A lot of talk, writing cheques with his mouth that perhaps his body can't cash. I think people have just had a guts full. I think Australian rugby is the lowest it's ever been, and yeah, they just need another broom to come through and start again. And maybe just a little bit too much of a talker, too much of a distraction, and yeah, they want a level of accountability, and people haven't, I guess, forgiven the Eddie Jones situation and the damage he's done over the last 3 or 4 months. And it's like, well, hey, it's not just going to fall on that. It's not just going to fall on the shoulders of one man.
Yeah, he's paid the price.
And look, and he's paid the price. And it's interesting. I've said that here in New Zealand. I mean, when it's all said and done, we didn't win a Rugby World Cup, and I know Ian Foster sort of redeemed himself to a degree, but really won one major Test match out of 4, if you include the South African Test. And Mark Robertson's still in a job, even though that relationship's broken completely down with Foster at the time. We've seen just how Mickey Mouse New Zealand rugby is, but Australia have actually got this right. They've made more than just one person accountable for the shambles, and I'd like to see a similar thing happen here in New Zealand rugby. Hey, just on that, I did just want to touch briefly on Michael Hooper deciding that he wants to go and play some sevens. I admire him for this. I like the fact that he wants to go to an Olympic Games. I've always, you know me, Martin, I love my Olympics. I have been to a number, and you can go to Rugby World Cup and you see 100 media. You go to the Olympics and you see 10,000 media. And Olympic game gold medals, they don't hand out a lot of them. They don't. That was always highlighted to me by a swimming coach, Dennis Cottrell, when talking about Danyon Loader. And he couldn't believe how much grief Danyon got here. He said, mate, do you know how few Olympic Games gold medals they hand out? And you've got a guy that won 2, and he really hasn't got the respect of your public. And I sit there and I still go back to 2016. I wonder whether the Ben Smiths and the Julian Saviers and the Artie Seviers and those players that did initially put their hand up to play for sevens in Rio and then turned it down for whatever reasons, when they're 20, 30 years from now in the Olympics on, whether they will regret that. Yes, they'll look back and go, yes, I've got a Welsh jersey that I swapped, and I've got an English jersey of this player that I swapped, and I've got my 50th All Black Test match jersey, but there's been 5 other players since then that have played in my position. I've been forgotten pretty quickly. And then thinking, man, wouldn't it be nice to go into my top drawer and bring out an Olympic Games medal? And they'll never do that. And I think that, and I admire Hooper for doing it. I admired young Caleb Clark for having a crack at it, even though he didn't end up making the squad for Tokyo back in 2020. I just think there are certain things in life money can't buy. I think there are certain experiences that I just don't think you should turn down. And I think the Olympic Games is one of those.
Devlin.
You've gotta love sport.
The platform.